In this video, I'm not providing you any guarantees. I'm just simply providing feedback for what's been my experience thus far. Now, I've heard many stories from multiple people that they have applied for 200, 300 job applications and never heard anything back. Now, I can't comment on if they've gone through the intensive process of customizing for every single application, if the resumes fit or whatever. But from what I've experienced thus far, I have integrated in video links from Loom, which will notify me if it's been viewed by a human. And in order for it to be viewed by a human, it must get through the ATS system, which is the application tracking system. And it is what's being utilized by a lot of companies to be the initial filter for a lot of the keywords and phrases that they are looking for to cross-reference it with the applicant before it even sees the light of day to a human being. Depending on where you go, you'll have different pools you'll be competing with. So I've been applying for a little bit, and I have been surprised at the lack of responses. So I don't believe that I'm getting through a human, specifically because none of these video links are being viewed. Otherwise, I would be notified. And so with that, I need to change strategy. So one of the things I was using as a key performance indicator on this evaluation was that simple: is the Loom video being reviewed and viewed? And if it is, then I at least know it reached a human being. Now, it's possible that human beings are simply omitting the link. However, considering that they typically want a link, whether it be to your website, your GitHub, to anything that they can do, your LinkedIn, to find out more information about you, then I think it's quite reasonable to make the assumption that they would click on it, especially because I know that many applicants are not going to be including within their resume links to specific videos that are curated and scripted directly to the potential company lead or whoever you're addressing. So with that, I've recorded previously separate things on some of the things I've taken and the tactics to address the initial issue. And the initial issue is curating these custom tailored resumes for each company. And although these custom tailored scripts for the videos have been tailored one way, and that's been automated in one process, the separate issue of getting through that ATS system is definitely showing me that I need to make some adjustments. So with that, I am following the art of war, because it's the way I see it. We're already facing the competition of robots, AI, etc. Now, the ATS systems are not anything new, but as far as how heavily they are being leveraged might be something to consider. So what I did is I reviewed quickly the rules from Sun Tzu's Art of War, as far as the general strategy, as it's pretty applicable to a lot of different goal-oriented items in life. So with that, basically one thing I need to do is really understand ATS. And with the ATS system, I want to know what are its weaknesses, its points of exploitation, what are the advantages that are being utilized, how is it being utilized by these different companies, by HR, and specifically, how is HR or a human being going to be making the elective choice to get in contact with a human being versus the robot? Now, there's some of the automated processes, which I don't know because each company is different, where the filter might automatically contact you or automatically reject you. And with that, one thing that I did during my research is basically found that there is two kinds of almost conflicting problems here. Because on the one hand, you want to get past the gatekeeper, which in this case is the robot. And the gatekeeper, in most cases, is rather simplistic. It's mainly predominantly looking for specific keywords and phrases that overlap and correlate with the actual position that's being applied. However, having said that, on top of it, one of the things that was also recognized is that the keywords and different items like that can be a positive or negative, because if you're simply keyword spamming, then that can actually pull you down, or it may have a neutral effect where essentially it's been checked and it's not going to add any additional value to the resume. But when it's reviewed by a human, they'll see that repetition process and they'll easily see that you just simply, spammed it with those specific keywords. So ironically, there's the fine balance between getting past the gatekeeper, but also once it gets to a human being, the human being evaluating that you're not simply just, spamming it with those specific keywords, especially if they're not relevant to your field or the job experience. Another thing, too, is going to be the fact that there is a ranking system. There is going to be a assigned point value. And this is no different than with typical SEO or any algorithm or even just AI and tokens, how essentially there's a certain value that's being attributed to weigh the likelihood of it being a more appropriate candidate versus a least appropriate candidate, having things that align, and also maybe additional items that are not listed inside of the system, but also can be explicitly said separately from what's actually posting. So taking these factors in, as well as a few others on the actual different common ATS systems that are available and how they're utilized and how they actually end up getting to a end user, I then basically have curated some modifications in my process. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I want to make the process for me on the applying side as efficient as possible, but also as custom tailored as possible. Now, although I do have some manual tools that I can automate for some of the manual repetitive tasks, the real issue is because I got to intercede accordingly, whether it be through an API process or whatever, to get that custom and verify accurate information into the job applications. It's not always the best to automate every step in the process, but I have set up my keyboard in a manner so that the process of having separate windows lined up in a very sequential order can be copy, pasted, X, repeat, format, bring this here, check it over, verify, okay, looks good, move on to the next one, right? And even when doing that for just one application, it can still take a reasonable amount of time. But at least I know that what's being presented is hopefully going to have sufficient information and opportunity to get past the ATS system. When also what I'm doing is making sure that if assuming that I do get to a human, I want the best opportunity for them to view it as standing out. And so for that reason, the video approach that I have been applying, I think, is still a good approach. However, I want to make some additional modifications under the assumption that I am now going to start getting past the ATS system. Now, what will probably end up happening is I will have to provide additional information, as it does not penalize me on the ATS system. But upon human review, it might have a negative effect, as it might be too much information, might be overwhelming, and that could actually work against me. So in that scenario, I want to make sure that by the time it does get to the human and the human has the opportunity to scan, if they feel overwhelmed by all that additional information, that I will simply have links to relevant video information that does two things. One, it has a little bit of soft skills in there and demonstrating, some sort of online presence, and allows the opportunity to do additional online research. You see a face. There's a lot of validation, credibility that can get added up fairly quickly utilizing the videos that I have available. Not only that, but it also means I can re-leverage items that I've spent some time recording, putting out there, and also a demonstration of my knowledge and understanding on the various materials available. So how have I done this? Well, recently, ChatGPT did an introduction of projects. And that's been very helpful because before this, I was using an API sandbox setup in order to add a knowledge set and specific instructions for what I wanted to provide me when I provided a specified input. As a quick review, essentially what I can do now is I can take this project and insert periodically updated information that elaborates upon the information provided in my resume and LinkedIn, which is really where I want them to go. But let's be honest, they're just bullet points. So here I can elaborate with paragraphs and additional knowledge sets about my volunteering, education, job history, right? Not only that, but I can take that prompting, and I can be very explicit about some of the specific instructions that I want it to do, because it's going to recognize that the input that I'm providing into the prompt field is simply a direct copy and paste of the job posting and the details about that. By default, it's going to provide me a cold email outreach, which is okay, but it's actually not what I'm going to be utilizing it for right off the bat. Now I have pre-selected prompts that I will provide it immediately upon the actual job application process. Because one of the things that's obviously really all the focus, and I can get the most return on my investment time, is around the work experience area, because that's where the ATS is going to spend the vast majority of its time, as well as the human verifying if this is somebody worth investigating further, because they're trying to look not only for that overlap, but also anything specific that might stick out. So with that, if I've applied for a position before, it's one thing to have a lot of the boring stuff filled in with the locations, etc. But rather, what I want to do is I want to clear out the role description area, because that's going to be something that providing me the opportunity to take simple input that does not have to be parsed from the resume. One of the things that might have happened is I have a lot of information available. And traditionally, I was trying to trim it down to one page, because that's kind of how it usually works. You want to keep your resume short and sweet. However, the opportunity to put the manual information does not get penalized within the ATS system. In fact, the opportunity to have more overlapping information is available. So with that, what I'm actually doing is I'm using the area here to have more specific information relevant to the position and how it overlaps specifically with my my experience in the role. As I mentioned, I have specific projects, specific stories, etc., that I have in the knowledge base that can be pulled up, prompted, etc., so that I can go ahead and have some information here. So after copying and pasting the information onto the side here, what I'm now going to do is have a separate prompt. And this specific prompt, I am targeting some of the particular companies that I've been a part of that I'm going to be including within this work experience area. Also, during these ATS systems, a lot of them allow the humans to not only check on the resume that has been parsed, but also the information that's been included on the digital field. And these fields, I think, is really the window of opportunity, as there might be way too much information. But at this point, I think the issue is that I'm not providing enough information to get past the system. Because especially if you don't check every single box inside of the preferences or whatever, and somebody else does, you'll entirely miss that chance of even talking to a human being to establish yourself in that field. Now, I don't know if this is going to help me or not, but here's what I'm thinking. The human is going to be seeing the resume as well as this information. Now, this information here is a small summarized paragraph of some of the information provided. And the reason why I wanted to use that particular paragraph, which normally I wouldn't do in this role description, is because, one, the opportunity for those keywords to be in there is present. But separately, if the human is reviewing this area and they see all these bullet points, and which is fine if they want to check out the bullet points, but I've had to review resumes before, and it can be a lot to review all these bullet points, especially I haven't had to dealing with a massive ATS system that can bring in tons and tons of candidates to this level, right? Some of these companies have to deal with hundreds of applicants, right? So with that, the summarization of specifically how that role summarized is applicable to this particular position is something that we're doing anyways and curating anyways inside of these bullet points. So why not just cut to the chase for the human being right up front? If they want to get to more details, the bullets are there. Is it a bit too much information? I don't know. A lot of this is just experimentation at this point, because I am kind of facing too many cooks in the kitchen. On the one hand, I have a system that's really not intelligent and just scanning for keywords and phrases that we don't want to spam. On the other hand, it's not going to get to that person unless enough of those keywords and phrases exist, but it cannot be too much and not be not relevant. This is just for demonstration purposes, so I'm just going to quickly run through some of this. Okay, so if I was to copy and just paste this over, I hit another problem, right? Because the problem is that this is formatted fine for the ATS system since it's going to go ahead and just be parsed anyways. But for the human eye, if they were to look at this, they're not going to want to look at this. In fact, they'll probably just default to the resume, right? And assuming that the resume was even parsed correctly by the system, on the other end, it may not even look that good on the other side, assuming that or they might have to go straight to the PDF, which they may or may not want to do. So I need to make sure that this is also presentable to a human. And in order to have that separation, I could run it through a script, but once again, I might have to do this a couple different times. Each company is going to be possibly a little bit different. And depending on the situation, I may not want all of these bullet points. So what can I do? We come to Visual Studio Code. So if you're a developer, then you already know. You can just go ahead and paste this. Dealing with the rich text editor to normal standard type is not anything new to developers. We've had to deal with this kind of stuff from clients all the time. And dealing with different types of formats, it's a very common issue. So in this situation, I can leverage, one, my keyboard, and what I can do is leverage my ability to make modifications across multi-cursor lines much faster. Okay, great. This looks formatted pretty nice. We'll go ahead and take it all, bring it into the relevant spot. We'll go ahead and just delete, and then just go ahead and paste it right in there. And now you can see that it's been formatted in a presentable, human legible way. Once again, I'm not guaranteeing this is going to work. This is really experimentation at this point. So you would take and repeat this process for all the other pieces of information. Don't have something that in there, then we just go ahead and ask it to be more specific about a position that's listed or that we want to add. One of the other items that I'm thinking about is the fact that normally I've been omitting certain pieces of information because I just have too much. Is that going to hurt me or benefit me? I don't know. But at the same time, the opportunity is there that if I can find something relevant, then perhaps it'd be advantageous to include some of that older stuff that might be, right around that 10-year mark. Because beyond 10 years, I don't know if anybody really cares. But it definitely shows that you've been working a long time. I don't know. The real question is, if a human sees that older pieces of information, what will they be thinking? Well, if it's an entry-level position, they're probably thinking that they're overqualified. And why are they applying to an entry-level position? If it's a senior-level position, they actually might want to see some of that older pieces of information. If it's a position that deviates slightly from the last couple of years, but does have relevance in history, then it does show a longevity, and this isn't your first time applying or utilizing these skill sets that you're talking about. So my thinking is it's really only helpful within this portion of it if I think it's actually going to yield me some actual benefit. Otherwise, why bother including the experience at all? If they want that additional information, it's going to exist on my LinkedIn or wherever else, right? Or during conversation, during the interview, which is really the goal. The goal is just to talk to a human being. Okay, now let's pause on this for a moment. Because one of the things that I've been mentioning is the resume, which also needs to be parsed. Now, my resume is quite extensive and elaborate. Although what I've started noticing is that when I brought my resume in to some of these applications to have it automatically parse, it sometimes doesn't parse very well. As you can see, I've modified it multiple times. I'll add bullets, take away bullets based on what the position actually is for. But really, it doesn't, turns out that when this stuff gets parsed, a lot of times it's not doing a very good job. And that could have to do with the whole grid setup behind the scenes of what's going on. And it is a pain in the butt to continuously try and remove things to these various grid types. But I found a tool. Now, this website is still in beta. And it's specifically designed for developers. And I actually haven't bothered applying to these kinds of positions, but rather I have been utilizing this tool here for the custom job gen. And the reason why is because I can basically take the information of the job posting, insert it into here. Now, it doesn't seem to do as good a job at modifying your resume as if you were to use one of these that have already been curated for you. But the way I see it is anybody who's familiar with this website is already going to be doing that kind of stuff. Rather, I'm utilizing it for this area. You see, in this area, one of the benefits is I can provide a whole bunch of various bullet points that are specific. Then I can take that information and have it be what's used here, and it can start me off with some of those bullet points. Or, let's just run through this. I insert the information, it's generating the resume as we speak, and now it's providing me a resume that I can use. A lot of bullet points, a lot of things going on. Will it be advantageous? I don't know. But what I'm most interested in is this. I'm most interested in the fact that I can actually take these items and I can add, delete them, because I can once again use ChatGPT or whatever GPT I want to use, and I can actually have these items updated quickly and do a much faster process of copying them over and deleting any that are not helpful. Then I'll be able to download that PDF. It's basically like having a giant area of all your information ready to go and curated into blocks. This is very similar to the prompt engineering I've talked about in the past using tools like Prometheus, where essentially the idea is we are breaking things down into blocks that are reusable pieces. And if this wasn't already here, it's actually what I was going to end up doing anyways with Prometheus. This is just curated specifically for resumes, and it's a simple enough interface that I can quickly copy and paste. Now, let me bring your attention to one small thing that normally I would not use. One thing I would never typically care to use is the summary. I think the summary area is a complete waste of space. However, if I can make this summary area to my advantage and specifically just in a one-sentence application use what they're looking for, so I have the opportunity for the keyword, as well as my relevant experience using one of the actual experience points, and combine that with specific links to the Loom video, so I can verify if a human's seen it, as well as another video, if relevant, for the position that demonstrates skill, additional opportunity for validation and credibility, as well as being an opportunity for them to venture off and do additional discovery on me as a candidate prior to actually reaching out. It's compounding the possibility of them following up. The skills area is something that I've also think is kind of a waste, as a lot of times this tends to be included inside of bullet points, especially because there's never enough space for bullet points with the skills. And the reality is honestly, that area is really just an opportunity for the ATS to pick up on some of those terms that maybe could not be curated inside of the work experience area. Now, the goal, of course, is still to try and keep this thing as short as possible, right? But I think, at least in my situation, a 2-page resume is reasonable, especially if that second page doesn't get ridiculously long. This might also be an opportunity for me to include items that are older, that are shown on my LinkedIn, but they may not fit. So it is still a little bit of additional manual labor in there, but I've really drastically cut down the mental load required to have these custom tailored resumes, as well as the walking through of the actual application process. Now, this might not be necessary for all fields. I don't even know if it's necessary for my field. I don't know if it's necessary for a lot of people or exactly how a lot of candidates are doing this application process. I know that there's some developers who are writing up different scripts so they can apply like crazy, but it seems like even developers are having a difficult time. And the inevitability of how I see the future changing with AI and a lot of these automated processes, wherever the workload can be taken off of the humans, especially as this becomes even more difficult and more competitive with humans trying to stand out, the more that we're going to have to start thinking about outside the box. There was times when you would send in a resume on bright colored paper, or you would have a very unique styled resume. However, those days are, I think, behind us, considering the fact that all the applications are really being done through these virtual processes. Not only that, but when everything's virtual and being parsed by the ATS system, at some point, it's got to look different somehow. But it's going to have to be with the content inside of the resume. We know that somewhere between 60 and 75% of resumes don't make it past the ATS system. So the real question is there any way that we can measure how many of the applications that we're actually doing get to a human being, especially when a lot of the responses for rejections are going to be automated anyways or have no response at all? So that's, at least for me, the only KPI, key performance indicator, that I could think of is whether or not a human has viewed some of these videos that I'm trying to send, especially when they're curated specifically to the company. As I mentioned, will this have an added advantage? I'm not quite sure yet. There's probably additional pieces within this process that I'll have to elaborate on, especially because there's an additional step in here, which is going to be me recording a customized Loom video specifically about myself and the position. But if you're interested in finding out how it goes, then I will be sure to provide you those results in a later video update. Thank you for watching.